Rosa here in the Rosa String Works workshop. Ready for the next part on the guitar build, and we're going to be bending the sides, as you might expect, since I just built that side bender. And I wanted to bring you up to date on the side bender. I first want to say thank you for all the information that y'all passed on to me, the suggestions and all the different ideas and things. I appreciate those. Most of them, to be perfectly honest with you, I already knew about or have already tried. I would say 90% of them. The one point of confusion on my part and why I was having so much trouble at the beginning bending the wood was I didn't really know what the temperature needed to be. And I know you might say, well, how have you built instruments in the past if you don't know the temperature? Well, I didn't use this method. And electric is much more quote-unquote temperature specific, if you will. In the past, and many of you suggested that I just use a hot pipe and blow a torch through it. Well, in the past, for the past 35 years, that's exactly how I've done it. I bent probably 40 sets of mandolin sides that way or more, and never had any problem, but I never really ever checked the temperature. I just knew that, I got steam and it was hot and it bent, and I just bent them and I never had any trouble. And it worked fine. Well, then why didn't I know the temperature for bending the guitars? Because I've also built about 8 or 9 guitars, I guess, something like that, maybe more. And the reason I didn't know the temperature for bending guitar sides was because I used the trough method for boiling the sides and then bending them in a press, which many of you suggested also. So that's the way I've done it for the last 35 years. And never really had any problem with doing that at all until this particular set of sides. Padauk is very hardwood. I'm not saying it's any harder to bend than other woods, but it doesn't like to bend, I will tell you that. It's a very strong, stout wood, very resonant. I think you're going to be amazed how good this guitar is going to sound when we're done. At least I'm expecting it to be that way, so I'm hopeful anyway. The reason I had trouble and those broke, I think was 2 reasons. Number 1, I think I just had them a little too thick. And number 2, I probably didn't let them boil long enough. I had to move it to my house, which is the first time in 35 years I've ever done anything on instruments in my house. I've always done it in my shop. I've always had a separate shop. But what happened in this case on this guitar was I fired up my Coleman stove, which is how I've always boiled the sides in the past, and after 35 years it gave up the ghost. It wouldn't work that day. So I moved everything up to the house and boiled them in the kitchen, and I think I rushed it because I was in the kitchen, in the house, in the kitchen, and I was just rushing through it. And I think that's what, the combination of rushing through it, not boiling them long enough, and having the sides too thick caused the problem. Having that problem, I just decided it was time to make the side bender. So I did make it. Now, let me tell you what I've learned about the side bender. I got to tell you, I'm really happy with it. I don't think I could have really done much better. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or brag or anything, but I tell you what, it's as good as any side bender needs to be, I believe. The reason I was having trouble was I didn't understand it. That's just the truth of it. You have that learning curve. I've now successfully bent a set of sides, which you'll see here in a moment in the video. And once I understood it, it wasn't that hard to do. So here we go. Let me show you what I've learned. Okay, well, first of all, the aluminum was a good idea. That really does heat up fast, and it transfers the heat to the stainless pretty well. I think there's a little loss there as it's getting into the stainless. But overall, that worked really well. And I like the stainless versus the aluminum for guitar sides especially, because I don't think the stainless mars the finish at all. I think aluminum probably would to some degree. Some of the aluminum might rub off a little bit. It might stain it just a little bit. So I like the stainless thing there. I might have been able to just get away without the stainless and just use aluminum. I don't know. We'll start to know that probably when I start bending mandolin sides on the top piece. The other thing I learned about this is that it is very uniform on the heat. I mean, it's only a degree or 2, and actually it's usually warmer on this tip than it is down through here. The other thing I learned is that this actually does work. Where my confusion came in about this thing, I saw a video where a guy was using this and he was talking 180 degrees. Well, you know, being from the United States, I thought he was talking Fahrenheit, and obviously he was talking Celsius. So, as many of you pointed out, I should use 180 degrees Celsius. Well, once I got it up to 180 degrees Celsius, which I forget the exact number in Fahrenheit, I think it was 360 something, roughly, in that neighborhood. Once I got it up in that range, then things started happening well, and it started working well. Then it started to feel like bending it on the hot pipe with the torch again. So I learned all that. I also learned that I really liked having this flat table. I think that is just the best way to go because you've got those long sides, you keep your bends straight, perpendicular. It's just perfect for that. And the other thing, and this here, in my opinion, if you're not using this kind of technology to bend your sides, you ought to give this a try. This really does make it a lot easier and faster, and it holds the steam in really well, and it spreads the stress out. You can pretty much just torque them down and pull, and you don't have to worry too much. Now, obviously, you can't do it right when you first start. You got to soften it up a little bit and get it going. But once you get it starting to move and bend a little bit, you can really torque down on this and just can bend those sides. And you know the stress is being spread around this whole thing rather than at one spot. And it really does make bending sides much easier. So all in all, I am tickled with this. Now, where am I going to go with it from here? Many of you suggested that I get a digital temperature controller. And nothing would make me happier, to be perfectly honest with you. I would love to have a digital temperature controller on this. But you got to remember, there's a couple of other issues with that. You got to have a probe. The probe's got to be somewhere in contact, preferably with the surface, because that's what you're bending on. And there's no way to put a probe on this outside here for the temperature control, you know, now without it getting in the way, okay? So the only real good option for that is to drill up from the inside somewhere along this outer perimeter and drill up through there and put the probe inside the tube. And I may do that once if and when I find a controller that I think would be the right one. Many of you suggested different controllers, and I've looked at most of those, and I've ruled most of them out for one reason or another. I just haven't decided on a controller yet. But I think it would just be the cat's meow to have a digital readout here of telling me exactly what the temperature is on this thing. You'll probably see that down the road, that I'll add that, but I'm not going to jump into that immediately because I want to think it through and make sure I do the right thing, because overall this thing just works great. And even this really doesn't work too bad. Right where I have it set there is roughly that 180 Celsius and 360 roughly Fahrenheit. So, you know, I'm not all the way to the max, so I've still got some more to go. Other people suggested making them with a light bulb and a pipe and, you know, all kinds of different suggestions. I really wanted a rugged, professional deal. The way I built it with that cartridge heater from McMaster Carr, I don't think you can go wrong with that. I think that is just a professional way to do it. And so I'm very happy with everything about this except for the digital readout. And once I get that figured out, then I think I've got the cat's meow right here. So friends, I hope you will enjoy this, seeing this rest of this video on bending the sides. I take it all the way up to putting the kerf lining in on just the back. Then I ended the video at that point. Enjoy the video. Thank you for watching. I'm about ready to resaw some Padauk for a set of sides. I have everything set up here, and I just want to test it on a piece of scrap wood here before, just to make sure the blade is running true, because sometimes these blades will run off at an angle. That sawed pretty darn well, so I'm going to assume it's going to work. I mean, we're only talking about, you know, another $50 worth of wood here if it doesn't. Well, that couldn't have gone much better. That really sawed a nice fine line across there. Yeah, you can see the saw marks, but they're pretty fine. This piece is thicker than this piece, but this piece is thick enough that I'm sure we can use it. So I think we're in good shape. I'm real happy with the way that turned out. That can go really bad really fast. As I should have mentioned already in this video, this is the second set of sides I made for this guitar. The first set of sides failed miserably. The first set of sides, I thickness sand them down to about 81, 82 thousandths. These measure very consistently at 75 thousandths. Now that's only about 6 thousandths or so difference, but I can feel the difference in flexibility in this. This is still very stiff wood, but you can see it flexes a lot better. As you can see, the sides are bending, but they're bending slowly here. I was still in the beginning stages of my learning curve. I probably didn't have the iron quite hot enough yet. Whenever you see me stop there, I'm grabbing the water bottle and spraying the sides a little bit to get them a little bit wetter. Now that I get the temperature right on the Celsius, which is about 180 degrees, and that makes it roughly 360 something, 380 something on Fahrenheit, then it started bending much better. You can see that the sides are pretty flexible now. I can put them in my mold now and bend them right to shape. Shouldn't be a problem at all. Really, you know, it was a learning experience. I was just trying to bend it too cold. It works great at a hotter temperature. The Harbor Freight temperature controller actually does work pretty well, and it seems to, you know, be fairly consistent. So I'm very happy with it so far. You can see that I have the sides bent and they're inside the mold, and it'd be difficult to see, but there's a pencil line right here perpendicular to the top where I'm going to cut these sides are overlapping right now, and I've used a square to square off this line. That's the center line. I'm going to cut that off there. I've done the same on this inside here, and I'm going to cut that off. That's just this one side. It's overlapping the other one. When I get this side out of there, then I'll make the same center line on the other piece, and then hopefully these two will butt right up tight together. And that's good enough for now. I'll later probably do some fancy inlay in that joint, but I'll do that after the tail block is glued in. We're going to cut off that little extra there on the end. Once again, if this is not perfect, it doesn't really matter, because I will eventually inlay a joint, you know, some kind of a decoration on the outside here. And on this side, the neck will cover up the joint, so it doesn't really matter if it's perfect or not either. Although I am going to sand each one of them on my sander just to square them up a little bit, clean them up. We're going handheld. I wanted to be able to give you an idea of what's going on. I first clamped this side to the line. I have lines on the tail block that show where the center is, and on this end as well. And I clamped this side so that it lined up perfectly with those lines. Then this side here, I just put in and more or less just butted it up there, and I worked it all the way around till I got it to the seam right here. To show you that it is pretty close to perfect, if you look at the outside seam here, you can see it's pretty darn tight all the way around. So those sides are really fitting the mold very well. And so that should be a very true dreadnought size guitar. And I am going to be making the end blocks next. Cutting the neck block for this guitar. I made this really nice mahogany block to the specs on the plans, with the exception that I made it about almost a 1/4 inch wider this way, just for a little more strength, and I made it about less than 1/8 of an inch thicker this way. Just a little bit bigger. It just gives you a little bit more strength on the block, and it doesn't really change anything dynamically in the guitar. Now, there is one thing I have to do yet. Maybe you can see this. I'll try to zoom in. You can see that there's a little bit of a curvature here, that the block is straight and there's a little curvature in those sides, and that is by the plans, as a matter of fact. So what I need to do is slightly curve this flat side so that it just fits that radius a little bit better. And I'll do that on the belt sander. We're going to go ahead and glue this up. I'm pretty confident that I've got a good mating surface there. Some people would cut the dovetail in this ahead of time, and you know, that would be easier to do in a way, but I like doing it all manually and doing it, you know, at the time that I fit the neck, and it's just the way I do it. There's a lot of different things you could do and save a little time and probably be just as good, but I just like doing it the, I don't know, hard way, for lack of a better term. So now I'm putting this paper up close to the joint. It's not going to be a perfect fit on the paper here, but that'll save a little. If there's a little glue squeeze out, hopefully that'll save a little bit of the problem there. And I've got the center line marked on the block, and I can see the center line on the sides there. So I just line it up real good, and now we'll just clamp that down good and tight. Cutting out a blank for the tail block right now. Tail block needs to be thinned down to 1 inch, so I'm cutting it a little bit thicker than that, and then we'll thickness sand it. We're going to glue in the tail block, and yes, I know most tail blocks are not beveled, but I went ahead and beveled it, even though it makes it look like a neck block. I wanted it beveled just because I think it looks better. Nobody's really going to see it, but it also lightens up the tail block a little bit, and there's no reason to have the extra weight there. It's just a better job, I think. This one fits perfectly flat the way it is. I don't need to do any rounding or anything. Once we give that time to set up a few hours, then we'll start making the kerfing and put the kerfing in on the back. That'll help hold these sides to their shape a little bit better, and then we can take it out of the mold and put the kerfing on the top and get the top glued on. I really do like my Grizzly table saw that I have. I got this, let's look at the model number. It's a model G1023RL. I got this in their tent sale, and it was marked way down. I don't know, I saved at least half price on it. The only thing wrong with it was that the trunnion, the cast iron trunnion inside, was broken. Well, you know, I took a risk, and I didn't know what that would cost to fix. That only cost $40. Now, don't take me wrong, this safety switch thing here is broken too, but I don't care about that really too much. That's not that big a deal. The on-off switch part works. I had to make a little pointer for it right here. This little pointer, I made that, and that fixed that. There is one real big negative of this saw, and that is the dust collection on it absolutely sucks. Now, it has a dust collection port on the back, but what happened was, and maybe maybe this one just didn't have it. This hole was so big here that you know, the air wouldn't suck through, it wouldn't suck the sawdust through, the air would just flow through here freely. So that just this morning I made a modification. I cut a piece of inner tube, and I just used rubber cement right now, but I'm going to probably pop rivet this on here. But right now it's just on with rubber cement as a trial. And I've already tested it, and I can tilt it and everything. This thing moves through this slit, but it really reduced the airflow through there a lot. That helps suck the sawdust down. The other problem with the sawdust is that this thing here from the factory had such a big slot in it that, again, the air was just passing by. So I made this one out of plywood. I put little adjusters in right here where I could adjust it perfectly level. So it's absolutely level. And then I just raised the blade up through it. Now it's basically a zero clearance. So now the air doesn't have so many places it can escape. And I'm hoping that the sawdust suction will be much better. We're about to test it out because we're going to cut the kerfing for this guitar. That's more kerfing strip than I would ever need for this guitar, but it's nice to have extra. I can always use it on another project. After I recut these triangular strips, they're now 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch, which is just about right. And now I'm cutting the actual kerf in them. It's a very simple setup. This little stop board here stops me from going into the blade too far, and I have a pencil mark here just about 1/4 inch past the blade, and after I cut the kerf, then I just move the kerf over to that pencil mark, cut the next kerf. Very simple process. You can see that it makes a real nice kerf. Every once in a while I get a little tiny chip out like that right there, but it's not a big deal. And you know, the strength of the kerf is not the thin wall side, it's the big triangular piece. That's what's actually going to be making the strength. So this, by cutting the kerf really thin though, you can bend it to the sides really easily. So it really works good. Just going to make enough for this guitar, and the rest of that I'll just put in storage and use it down the road. Well, now that we have the kerfing made, we can put this in here. Just using the standard wood glue tight bond. Run a bead of it down through there. Then I just take my finger, because that just is the easiest for me, and spread it really well. That works fine right there. Now I just got to do it on the other side. Here's a quick look at all of the kerfing glued up on the sides, and you can see the 2 large clamps over there on the right that I'm using just to pull the sides out to the mold, but it should be fine.